But don't try and trick me now, because I'm not going to play this game. Delete that bit. John, can you just delete it, please, that bit? Because I don't want to go down this...
Duchess, I'm asking very fair questions of you.
No,
You will be his friend. I will listen to the friendship talk between you two.
The newly revealed emails from Sarah Ferguson to Jeffrey Epstein have just shaken the British royal family to its foundations, and what investigators uncovered is absolutely devastating. Just marry me, the Prince Andrew's ex-wife begged the convicted sex offender, barely 6 months after he walked out of prison. And this isn't just a sensational headline, these are real emails, documented, part of more than 3 million files released by the US Department of Justice last Friday. The depth of this relationship goes way beyond what anyone imagined. Fergie didn't just accept money from Epstein, she called him her greatest friend, her brother I always wished I had, and told him I am at your service. As the world watches in horror, these documents paint the portrait of a woman so financially desperate that she actually considered marrying one of the most notorious criminals of our time. And Prince Andrew is absolutely at the center of all of this. To understand how we got here, we need to rewind and understand who Sarah Ferguson really is. We know her as Fergie, the vibrant red-headed duchess who married Prince Andrew in 1986 in a wedding that captured the hearts of the entire world. She was fresh, full of energy, different from anyone else who'd entered the royal family. But you know how these fairy tales go, right? They rarely last. Her marriage started crumbling publicly in the 90s. The scandalous 1992 photographs with her financial advisor John Bryan, him kissing her feet during a vacation, appeared in every newspaper while she was still married to Andrew. Queen Elizabeth was horrified. According to multiple reports, she never fully forgave Fergie for that brutally public humiliation. They divorced in 1996, but here's the crucial detail that changes everything. Sarah Ferguson didn't receive the kind of financial settlement you'd expect. Unlike Diana, who negotiated a substantial package, Fergie walked away from the marriage with way less. And trust me, maintaining that public image, the properties, the staff, the royal appearances, all of that costs a fortune she simply didn't have. So picture the situation. A woman still young, still connected to the royal family through her daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, but facing massive debts. We're not talking thousands, we're talking millions of pounds. She tried various businesses, wrote children's books, made public appearances, even starred in commercials, but it was never enough. The debts kept growing like an unstoppable snowball. And that's where Jeffrey Epstein enters the scene. But you need to understand who Epstein was at that time, at least on the surface. To the outside world, especially before his first conviction in 2008, he was an enigmatic billionaire financier with incredible connections. He had mansions in Manhattan, Palm Beach, New Mexico, and a private island in the Caribbean. He flew in a private jet that would later earn the sinister name Lolita Express. Among his friends and associates were some of the most powerful men on the planet: Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, prominent scientists, elite academics. Nobody really knew how he'd made his fortune. His financial management firm supposedly only accepted clients worth over $1 billion, but the details were always vague and mysterious. We now know the horrible truth behind that facade of wealth and philanthropy. But back then, many people saw him simply as a rich, eccentric, well-connected guy. Prince Andrew met Jeffrey Epstein through Ghislaine Maxwell, daughter of disgraced media mogul Robert Maxwell. Ghislaine was friends with Andrew since the 80s, and she made the introduction around 1999. The three became intimate, very close. Andrew flew on Epstein's jet, stayed at his properties, and Epstein was welcomed at Buckingham Palace and Sandringham, the most sacred royal residences. Now here's the twist that changes the entire narrative. Fergie met Epstein through Andrew. According to multiple reports, it was Andrew himself who introduced his ex-wife to the billionaire, supposedly to help her with her financial problems. Think about that for a moment. Prince Andrew, trying to help the mother of his daughters, introduces her to a man who would later be convicted of horrific sex crimes against minors. The irony is absolutely devastating. The files released Friday reveal a relationship far deeper and more complex than anyone imagined. In August 2009, just 1 year after Epstein was convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor, Sarah Ferguson sent him an email that'll make you shudder. "I have never been more touched by a friend's kindness than your compliment to me in front of my girls. Thank you, Jeffrey, for being the brother I always wished I had." Let me repeat that. 1 year after his conviction for sex crimes, Fergie called him the brother I always wished I had. But wait, because this gets worse. By October 2009, things had become desperate for Ferguson. She owed approximately £5 million, according to various reports. In an email that's now public, she wrote to Epstein, "I urgently need £20,000 for rent today. The landlord has threatened to go to the papers if I don't pay. Any bright ideas?" Imagine that humiliation. A former Duchess of York, someone who'd lived in palaces, who'd been part of one of the most prestigious families in the world, begging money from a convicted sex offender because her landlord threatened to expose her publicly. But here comes the bombshell that's shaking the entire world right now. In January 2010, barely 6 months after Epstein walked out of prison, Sarah Ferguson sent him this email. "You are such a legend. I really cannot put into words, my darling. Gratitude for your generosity and kindness. I am at your service. Just marry me. Just marry me." Those 4 words have exploded like a bomb in British media. What was she thinking? Was it pure financial desperation? Or was there something more to this relationship than we're seeing on the surface? The emails show that Epstein did indeed pay £15,000 in December 2010 to help Ferguson settle part of her debts. Specifically, this money went to pay the overdue salary of her former personal assistant, Johnny O'Sullivan, who'd sued her for £78,000 in unpaid wages. After discussions with Andrew's office, Epstein stepped in and paid £15,000 so O'Sullivan would accept a settlement and Sarah could focus on restructuring the rest of her massive debts. But now we know it wasn't just £15,000. The newly revealed emails show that in January 2010, Ferguson asked Epstein for $50,000 or $100,000 to help me through the little bills that are pushing me to the edge. An email from Epstein to a friend suggests he'd secretly funded Sarah Ferguson for 15 years. 15 years. Let that sink in for a moment. And while all this was happening, Sarah took her adult daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, to visit Epstein just 5 days after he got out of prison, according to documents. Can you imagine? She took her own daughters to see a convicted sex predator. When asked about this, a Ferguson representative said neither she nor her daughters had any recollection of such a visit, but Epstein's emails specifically mention it. In July 2010, Epstein wrote to Sarah, asking if there was any chance your girls will say hello to one of his associates. Sarah responded that Beatrice was in London with her father, then made an extraordinarily inappropriate comment, "Eugenie is away with a wonderful boyfriend," adding that she was waiting for Eugenie to return from a sex weekend. That's the kind of casual language she used in emails with a convicted sex predator about her own daughter. Now here's where the story gets even darker. The emails reveal that Epstein planned to use Ferguson to rehabilitate his public image. In March 2011, Epstein wrote to his crisis publicist Mike Citrick, "I think Fergie can now say, I am not a pedo." Citrick responded that they had a strategy to get the newspapers to stop calling you a pedophile and get the truth out there, and one of the tactics was to get Fergie to retract. And it worked. In March 2011, Ferguson gave an interview to the Evening Standard where she said, "I personally, on behalf of myself, deeply regret that Jeffrey Epstein became involved in any way with me. I abhor pedophilia and any sexual abuse of children, and know that this was a gigantic error of judgment on my behalf." But here's the twist that shows the true nature of this relationship. Just 7 weeks after that public interview where she denounced him, Sarah sent a private email to Epstein apologizing. "I know you are feeling infernally disappointed in me," she wrote. "I did not and would not say the word P," she insisted, referring to pedophile. And then she added, "You have always been a constant, generous and greatest friend to me and my family. Let me tell you something I find absolutely crazy about this. Ferguson told him in that email that she'd only done that interview to protect my own brand, specifically her children's book empire and her work as a children's charity figure. So she basically admitted that publicly denouncing Epstein was just theatre, a performance to save her career, while privately she still considered him a greatest friend. The betrayal is staggering when you think about it. Betrayal of Epstein's victims, betrayal of the public who wanted to believe she had some moral code, betrayal of her own daughters who deserved better than a mother associating with a predator like that. And let's talk about the invitations she extended to Epstein. The emails show that in February 2010, Andrew's private secretary Amanda Thirsk sent a formal invitation to Epstein for Andrew's 50th birthday party at St. James's Palace. "Beatrice, Eugenie and I would love to invite you to celebrate Dad's Andrew's 50th, the message read. "It will be lounge suits and cocktail dresses, and you know me, mysterious shenanigans, so bring your gifts, your presents and your sense of humor." Epstein responded, "Can't make it, but the fact that he was invited to a formal royal event just months after getting out of prison shows how deeply intertwined they all were. And there's more. The emails suggest Ferguson offered to arrange VIP tours of royal palaces for Epstein and his associates. One Epstein email says, Fergie said she could arrange tea at the Buckingham Palace Apartments or Windsor Castle. Get what this means. She was using her access to the royal family, her status as mother of princesses, to give social credibility to a convicted sex predator. She was actively helping him rebuild his reputation by giving him access to the most sacred places of the British monarchy. The situation became so toxic that in July 2010, after Ferguson was caught in a newspaper sting by the News of the World offering access to Andrew for £500,000, she wrote to Epstein in absolute desperation, "As I have always said, no woman has come out of the royal family with her head, and they cannot behead me, therefore they will discredit me, totally to obliteration. I have no words." This email reveals something fascinating about Ferguson's psychology. She saw herself as a victim of the royal family, someone being systematically destroyed by the institution. And in that moment of absolute vulnerability, her confidant, the person she turned to, was Jeffrey Epstein. A convicted sex predator was her emotional support system. Now fast forward to 2026. The impact of these emails has been devastating for Ferguson. Her charitable foundation, Sarah's Trust, announced Monday night that it would close in the foreseeable future. The statement said this had been under discussion and underway for some months, but the timing right after these files dropped can't be coincidence. Multiple charities had already dumped her in 2025, when earlier emails revealed she'd called him her greatest friend. Julia's House, a children's hospice, fired her as patron in September 2025, saying it would be inappropriate for her to continue in that role. The Teenage Cancer Trust also severed ties. Now, with these new emails showing the true extent of her relationship with Epstein, it's hard to see how any reputable organization would want to associate with her, and her personal situation is equally chaotic. Sarah and Andrew had to vacate Royal Lodge, their home for nearly 2 decades, on January 25th. Andrew moved to Marsh Farm on the Sandringham estate, a much more modest 2-bedroom residence. But here's the surprising twist. After all these years living together as the happiest divorced couple in the world, Sarah has apparently decided it's time to separate. Sources close to Ferguson told Hello magazine she's ready to spread her wings and won't be moving with Andrew to Norfolk. Her daughters Beatrice and Eugenie have offered temporary accommodation, but Ferguson is reportedly considering moving to Portugal, where Eugenie has property, or possibly even Switzerland. There are reports that both Sarah and Andrew feel the situation in Britain has become intolerable, a source told OK magazine. There is a real sense that the situation has become unbearable. They feel constantly judged, scrutinized, and publicly shamed, with no let-up. Even their most ordinary decisions provoke criticism, and that relentless pressure is pushing them to seriously consider a future away from Britain, where they can live with some dignity and peace. But here's the question everyone's asking: can they really run from this? The Epstein files are now part of the public record. The internet never forgets. Wherever Sarah and Andrew go, these emails will follow them. "Just marry me" will be part of their legacy forever. And let's talk about the impact on Beatrice and Eugenie. These young women, now 37 and 35 respectively, have had to deal with the Epstein scandal, not just through their father, but also through their mother. Imagine reading emails where your mother makes crude comments about your personal life to a convicted sex predator. Imagine knowing your mother potentially took you to visit that man just days after he got out of prison. According to reports, both Beatrice and Eugenie have maintained a close relationship with both parents despite the scandals. That loyalty is admirable, but they must also be processing incredibly complex emotions. They retain their princess titles because they're the daughters of a sovereign son, but how long will they want to maintain that public profile when every headline about their family is devastating? King Charles, now firm in his vision of a slimmed-down monarchy, has made clear that neither Andrew nor Ferguson have any place in the public royal family. Prince Edward, Andrew's younger brother, became the first royal family member to publicly comment on the Epstein files Monday. Speaking at the World Government Summit in Dubai, he said, "I think it's really important to always remember the victims and who the victims are in all of this." It's a carefully crafted statement that manages to express sympathy for Epstein's victims without specifically mentioning Andrew or Ferguson. But the subtext is clear. The royal family wants to distance itself as much as possible from this scandal. Prime Minister Keir Starmer has urged Andrew to testify before the US Congress about his links to Epstein. Anyone who has information should be prepared to share that information in whatever form they're asked to, Starmer said Saturday. You can't be victim-focused if you're not prepared to do that. So far, Andrew hasn't responded to that request. He resigned from royal duties in 2019 after that disastrous BBC Newsnight interview where he tried to explain his friendship with Epstein. Then in October 2025, King Charles stripped him of all his titles after Virginia Giuffre publicly alleged she'd been trafficked to have sex with Andrew 3 times, including twice when she was 17. Andrew denies all accusations and reached a financial settlement with Giuffre in 2022, though he insists he never met her. But the latest files include undated photos of Andrew on all fours over a woman lying on the floor. The Justice Department redacted the woman's face, but the images are enough to keep questions swirling. Now let me tell you something I find particularly fascinating about how this story's evolving. There's a notable difference in how the public has responded to Ferguson versus Andrew. Fergie has been largely not forgiven exactly, but treated with more compassion than Andrew. Why? Because there's an understandable narrative of financial desperation that people can grasp, even if they don't approve. She was in debt. She was desperate. She made a terrible decision, accepting money from Epstein. It's unforgivable, yes, but it's humanly understandable, in a way that Andrew's continued friendship with Epstein simply isn't. Andrew was friends with Epstein, stayed at his properties, flew on his planes, spent time with him even after the 2008 conviction. There was no financial need there, just personal affinity. And that's a much harder pill for the public to swallow. But let's be clear, the fact that Ferguson had financial need doesn't excuse her actions. The emails show she didn't just accept money from Epstein, she flattered him, defended him privately while denouncing him publicly, offered to give him access to royal palaces, and apparently considered marrying him as a solution to her financial problems. And that "just marry me" comment, let me tell you, it's generated endless analysis. Was it serious? Was it a joke between friends? Or was it a desperate plea from a woman who saw no other way out of her financial crisis? The context of the email suggests it probably wasn't completely serious in the traditional sense of a marriage proposal. It seems more like a hyperbolic expression of gratitude, like saying, "I owe you my life," or "I'd do anything for you." But the fact that she expressed that level of debt and obligation to Epstein is revealing in itself. It shows how completely dependent she'd become on him financially, how willing she was to debase herself to maintain that money flow. And for Epstein, that was exactly the point. This wasn't just about helping a friend in need, it was about creating obligation, building leverage, having something on someone connected to the British royal family. Because that's what Epstein did, right? He built networks of obligation through financial favors, social access, and compromises that people then felt obligated to repay. Helping Ferguson gave him continued access to royal circles through her and Andrew. It gave him social credibility. After all, if the Duchess of York accepted his help and called him her greatest friend, how bad could he really be? And the emails show Epstein was very conscious of that connection's value. When meeting with others, he'd name-drop Fergie, brag about being able to arrange tea at Buckingham Palace, use his relationship with her and Andrew as social currency. So where does this leave Sarah Ferguson today? Honestly, in a very dark place. Her charity has shut down. Multiple organizations have abandoned her. She's being evicted from her home. Her reputation is shattered in ways that probably won't ever fully recover. And these emails ensure her association with Epstein will be the first line of her obituary when that day comes. But here's what's also true. Sarah Ferguson has shown remarkable survival capacity over the years. She's faced bankruptcy, public scandals, exile from the royal family, health issues including breast cancer in 2023, and now this. And she's still here, still fighting, still apparently trying to find her way forward. Does that mean we should forgive or forget her actions with Epstein? Absolutely not. Those decisions have consequences, and those consequences have been and will continue to be significant for her. But it does mean we can see her story as something more complex than just another royal scandal. It's a story about financial vulnerability, about how predators exploit desperation, about how bad decisions in moments of crisis can haunt you for decades. It's a story about the brutal realities of life after royalty, where you're expected to maintain the glamour and status without necessarily having the financial resources to do it. It's a story about the power of money to corrupt, to create compromises people would never have imagined making in other circumstances. And it's a story about how even those who seem to live privileged lives can face moments of deep desperation that lead them to dark places. Now looking forward, there are huge unanswered questions. Will Andrew testify before the US Congress? Will he and Ferguson actually move out of Britain? What happens to Beatrice and Eugenie, who've maintained royal titles so far, but whose association with their parents becomes increasingly toxic? And what about the files themselves? This latest release was massive, over 3 million documents, but experts say there's probably more to come. More emails, more photos, more evidence of how deeply Epstein had penetrated elite circles, not just in America, but around the world. For Sarah Ferguson specifically, the question is whether there can be any kind of redemption after this. Is it possible to rebuild a public life when the emails you wrote to a convicted sex predator are now part of the historical record? Can there be a way back when you begged that man just marry me? The honest answer is probably not, at least not in the form that existed before. Sarah Ferguson's days as the face of children's charities are definitely over. Her ability to monetize her royal connection is shattered. Even her relationship with the wider royal family, already strained, likely won't ever fully repair. But perhaps, and this is speculation on my part, there could be a different kind of future for her. One where she uses her experience, as horrible and shameful as it is, to speak about financial vulnerability, about the ways people can be exploited when they're desperate, about the real price of bad decisions. I'm not saying she should be forgiven or rehabilitated. Epstein's victims deserve justice and recognition, not another privileged person turning their connection to him into some kind of redemptive journey. But I am saying human stories are complicated, and there are lessons in this catastrophe if we're willing to look at them. The lesson about how money, or lack of it, can lead educated, intelligent people to make morally repugnant decisions. The lesson about how predators build networks of obligation that trap people in compromises they never imagined. The lesson about how privilege and title don't protect against financial desperation or bad decision-making. And perhaps the most important lesson, that we need to create better support systems for people facing financial crises before they reach the point where someone like Jeffrey Epstein seems like a savior instead of the predator he was. Because at the end of the day, this story isn't just about Sarah Ferguson and Jeffrey Epstein. It's about power, money, exploitation, and the ways predators build empires of influence, not just through direct abuse, but through elaborate networks of financial and social obligation. It's about how desperation can make people rationalize the irrational, how need can blind people to obvious red flags, how fear of poverty and public shame can lead even former royals to beg help from convicted criminals. And it's about consequences. Sarah Ferguson is living the consequences of her decisions now in ways she probably never imagined when she wrote those emails to Epstein. Her charity shut down, her reputation shattered, her home lost, her future uncertain. Those are real and significant consequences, but the bigger consequences are for Epstein's victims, whose trauma was allowed to continue, partly because people like Ferguson, Andrew, Ghislaine Maxwell, and so many others in elite circles chose to ignore the warning signs, accept the convenient explanations, or simply not ask the hard questions, because doing so would have disrupted their own comfortable lives. So what do we take away from all this? First, that royal fairy tales rarely have happy endings, especially when the money runs out. Second, that financial desperation can lead intelligent people to make terrible decisions. Third, that predators like Epstein build power, not just through direct abuse, but through networks of obligation and compromise. And finally, that the words you write, the decisions you make, the associations you choose, they all have consequences that can haunt you long after you think the chapter's closed. Just marry me, Sarah Ferguson wrote to Jeffrey Epstein. 4 words that now define her. 4 words that encapsulate a relationship she herself has called a gigantic error of judgment. 4 words that raise questions about desperation, morality, and how far someone's willing to fall when facing financial ruin. The next time you see a headline about the royal family, about Sarah Ferguson, or about the Epstein files, remember there are real human stories behind those headlines. Stories of decisions made under pressure, of misjudgments with lasting consequences, of lives that took turns nobody could have predicted. And if this deep dive made you think, if it made you consider the complexities of life behind palace doors, then let me know in the comments what you think. Should Ferguson be forgiven for her association with Epstein, given her financial desperation? Or are there some decisions that are simply unforgivable, no matter the circumstances? And what about Andrew's role in all this? He was supposedly the one who made the introduction. These are conversations worth having because the Epstein scandal touched so many lives in so many different ways. Some were direct victims of his horrific crimes. Others were enablers who allowed those crimes to continue. And others, like possibly Ferguson, got caught in his web of financial obligation without fully understanding what they were getting into, or simply not wanting to see it. If you found this exhaustive investigation into one of the most shocking aspects of the Epstein scandal valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more content about the British royal family and the stories behind the headlines. I've got more research planned on Epstein's connections to powerful figures around the world, and trust me, what I've uncovered is absolutely fascinating and disturbing. Until next time, remember, the lives of the rich and famous may look glamorous from the outside, but the reality is often much more complicated, much darker, and much more human than any of us imagine. And sometimes the most shocking stories are those that reveal how desperate even people who seem to have everything can become. The Epstein files will continue revealing secrets in the coming months and years. More names, more connections, more evidence of how deeply he'd penetrated global power circles. And each revelation raises new questions about who knew what, who chose to ignore the warning signs, and who benefited from their association with him. For Sarah Ferguson, these newly released files may represent the end of any hope for public rehabilitation. "Just marry me" will join "gigantic error of judgment" as the phrases that define her legacy, and as Andrew hides away in Norfolk and Ferguson considers fleeing to Portugal or Switzerland, the world will keep asking questions, demanding answers, and seeking justice for Epstein's victims. See you in the next video, where we'll dive into another aspect of Epstein's legacy that's still unfolding and being discovered. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. The revelations continue, the story keeps developing, and the truth, however uncomfortable, is finally coming to light.